The mall was a universe of noise and light, a jarring contrast to the quiet, gray world inside her. She moved through the sprawling, decorated corridors like a ghost, unseen and untethered. Her name was Eva, and this was her first December without her mother. Everything about the season felt like a betrayal. The cheerful, tinny carols piped through the speakers were an affront. The giant, glittering ornaments hanging from the ceiling seemed garish and false. Even the forced smiles of shoppers felt like a performance she couldn't understand. The holiday had always been her mother's domain, a time of chaotic baking, terrible singing, and a warmth that seemed to seep from the very walls of their home. Now, that home was just a house, and the warmth was a memory she carried in her bones, a faint echo that grew fainter each day. Her reason for being here was practical, a task on a list. A friend's wedding. She needed a dress. Simple, black. It felt appropriate, this errand of somber procurement in the middle of all this forced joy. She clutched the straps of her empty tote bag, her knuckles white. The only comfort she allowed herself was the coat. It was her mother's old winter coat, a heavy, cream-colored wool thing with big buttons and a slight fray at the cuffs. When she'd slipped it on that morning, the familiar scent of faint, lingering whisper of her mother's lily-of-the-valley perfume mixed with the smell of old wool and home had nearly brought her to her knees. It was too big for her, swallowing her frame, but she didn't care. Wearing it was the closest she could get to an embrace. It was a shell she could retreat into, a private shield against the public merriment. She bypassed the main entrances of the big department stores, their windows screaming with red and green. She found a quieter, less decorated side entrance and slipped inside. The air here was different, cool, still, smelling of new cloth and floor cleaner. It was a relief. She made her way to the formal wear section, a sea of sequins and satin that felt alien. She found the rack of little black dresses and began to mechanically flip through them. Silk, chiffon, lace. None of them looked like anything. They were just shapes on hangers. A saleswoman with a kind, concerned face approached. "Can I help you find something for the holidays?" Eva almost flinched. "Just a wedding," she said, her voice flat. "Something simple." "Ah, a winter wedding." "How lovely," the woman chirped, not sensing the landmine she'd stepped on. Lovely. The word curdled in Ava's stomach. Nothing was lovely. Her mother would never see her in a wedding dress. That simple future grief layered on top of the present one, a crushing weight. "I'm fine, thank you," Eva said, cutting her off before she could suggest anything festive. The woman nodded, her smile faltering slightly, and moved away. Eva pulled a simple shift dress from the rack and held it against herself in front of a mirror. Her reflection was a stranger pale, shadows under her eyes, swimming in her mother's oversized coat. The black fabric looked like a void. She imagined standing at the wedding, a blot of darkness amidst the celebration, people pitying her, asking in hushed tones how she was holding up. The thought was exhausting. She put the dress back. She couldn't do it. Not today. The task felt Herculean. Choosing a dress felt like admitting life was moving forward, and she was stuck, frozen in the moment 6 months ago when everything ended. Abandoning the mission, she just started walking. She drifted through the store, a spectator to other people's normal lives. A teenager laughing with a friend over a sparkly top. A couple debating which coffee maker to buy. An elderly man carefully choosing a pair of gloves. Their easy, uncomplicated existences felt like scenes from a movie. She was no longer in. Her feet led her back toward the main concourse of the mall. As she neared the open center atrium, the generic holiday music was overtaken by the richer, clearer sound of a live piano. It was the mall's holiday pianist, a fixture every December. She'd passed him 100 times in previous years, never really stopping. The music was always background noise, part of the scenery, Today, the sound felt like an intrusion. She paused at the edge of the gathering, hidden behind a large potted poinsettia. There was a small crowd, parents with strollers, older folks resting on benches, shoppers pausing for a moment. In the center was a shiny black grand piano, and on the bench sat a man. He was probably in his late 50s, with kind, crinkled eyes and hair that was more salt than pepper. He wasn't dressed as Santa or an elf, just in a neat sweater and trousers. He played with a quiet concentration, his fingers moving smoothly over the keys. The song was Jingle Bell Rock, upbeat and playful. He was good, putting a little swing into it, and a few people tapped their feet. A small child clapped along off rhythm. The man looked up and smiled at the child, and his face transformed. It wasn't a performer's smile. It was genuine, warm. It was the smile of someone sharing a moment, not just playing a gig. For a reason she couldn't explain, that small, genuine smile pierced Ava's numbness. It was a glimpse of a human connection, simple and real, in the middle of all the commercial glitter. It reminded her of her mother, who could strike up a conversation with anyone, who found joy in tiny interactions. A memory slammed into her, vivid and sudden. Her mother at their own old, slightly out-of-tune piano at home. It wasn't a fancy instrument, just a piece of furniture she loved. She couldn't read music well, but she could play by ear. Her favorite thing to play, the only full song she really knew, was Danny Boy. She'd play it slowly, her touch hesitant but tender, humming along in her low, soft voice. She played it on quiet Sunday afternoons, when the light was golden. She'd hum it while Eva did homework at the kitchen table. It was the sound of contentment, of home, of her. The memory was so sharp, it was a physical pain. Ava's breath hitched. The cheerful piano tune in front of her now seemed to warp and twist, clashing violently with the somber, beautiful melody echoing in her head. The contrast was unbearable. The hollow feeling in her chest, which she had carried all day, yawned wider, a chasm of absence. She couldn't stand there another second. The joy of the crowd, the kindness in the pianist's face, the memory of her mother's song, it was all too much. She turned abruptly, almost bumping into someone, mumbled an apology she didn't feel, and fled. She didn't run, but her walk was fast, desperate, putting distance between herself and the music, between herself and the ghost of a feeling she couldn't handle. She ended up in a deserted hallway near the bathrooms, leaning against a cool tiled wall, trying to catch her breath that kept shuddering on the edge of a sob. She focused on the feel of the wool coat under her fingers, the faint, fading scent. She was here in a mall on a Tuesday. Her mother was gone. The world kept spinning, playing Jingle Bell Rock. It was all so brutally, stupidly simple. She didn't know how long she stood there, gathering the shattered pieces of her composure. Finally, the practical part of her brain, the part that had gotten her out of bed this morning, kicked in. She still had to go home. The car was in the garage. She had to walk back through the atrium to get there. Taking a deep, ragged breath, she pushed off the wall. Her face was a mask again. The hollow feeling was packed down, sealed tight. She would get her bags from the locker, walk straight through, eyes forward, hearing nothing. She could do that. It was just a walk across a crowded room, one foot in front of the other. That was all life was now. The walk from the quiet hallway back into the roar of the mall felt like stepping into a different world. She kept her head down, a trick she'd learned over the past months. If you didn't meet anyone's eyes, they mostly left you alone. She was a ship sailing through a noisy, colorful sea. Determined not to see the waves dot first, she had to retrieve her other bag from the coat check. It was just a tote with a few mundane things, a wallet, her keys, a water bottle. But the process of handing over the ticket waiting for the attendant to find it, saying thank you in a voice that sounded almost normal. It was a series of tiny performances that trained her. She slung the bag over her shoulder, the added weight a small, annoying anchor dot now for the final stretch. The parking garage elevator was on the far side of the atrium, right past the piano. There was no other way. She could have gone out a fire exit and walked the whole way around the building, but it was freezing outside and a long walk. The practical, tired part of her won out. She'd just power through. She'd be a ghost gliding past. He'd be playing something loud and festive, and she'd be gone in 30 seconds. She entered the atrium from the side. The crowd had thinned a little. The shift had probably changed for the pianist. The older man was still there, but he was leaning to the side, taking a slow sip from a thermos cup. The piano was silent for a moment, just the hum of the mall filling the space. It was her chance. She could walk right past while he was on a break. She started forward, her shoes making soft, quick sounds on the tile. She was halfway across the open space when the memory ambushed her again. Not a full memory, just a fragment of sound. The first few notes of Danny Boy, as her mother would play them, slow and a little unsure. The phantom melody was so clear in her head, it was almost audible. It mixed with the scent of her coat and a feeling of loss. So sharp and fresh, it stole the air from her lungs. Stopped her feet right there on the floor. She stood, paralyzed, about 20 feet from the piano. The man was putting his thermos cup down on the floor beside the bench. He stretched his fingers, ready to begin again. He was going to play another song, something happy and empty, and the song in her head, her mother's song, would be drowned out again. It would be pushed back into the quiet, lonely places where she kept everything that hurt. A wild, irrational thought burst into her mind. It was a crazy thought. It was not something she did. She was the person who avoided talk, who kept her head down, who carried her grief like a sealed box. Asterisk, what if he played it? Asterisk, the thought was terrifying. It meant speaking. It meant asking. It meant exposing this raw, tender part of herself to a complete stranger in the middle of a shopping mall. It was the absolute opposite of everything she had been doing to survive, but the longing was worse than the fear. The desire to hear that song, really hear it, played out loud in the world again, not from a phone recording, not in her memory, but live right now, was a physical ache. It was a need, sudden and overwhelming, to have something of her mother's presence acknowledged here, in this place of plastic cheer, to have a stranger conjure her, just for a few minutes. Her heart was hammering against her ribs. Her mouth went dry. The man's hands settled on the keys, poised to play. She moved before she could talk herself out of it. Her legs carried her forward, not in a confident walk, but in a shaky, almost dreamlike drift. She felt outside of herself, watching this fragile girl in a too-big coat approach a pianist. She stopped a few feet from the bench. He hadn't started playing yet. He sensed her presence and looked up. His eyes were a warm brown, and they held a patient, questioning kindness. He didn't look annoyed at the interruption. He just waited. Now she had to speak. The words were lodged in her throat, a tangled knot. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. She saw a flicker of gentle concern in his eyes. He wasn't in a hurry. He just sat, giving her space. She tried again. Her voice, when it finally came, was thin and raspy, barely more than a whisper. It was the voice of someone who hadn't used it much lately. "Excuse me? Yes?" He said, his own voice quiet, matching hers, not trying to project over the mall noise. She swallowed. I know it's not a Christmas song." She gestured weakly toward the piano, as if that explained everything. "But could you—" She took a shaky breath, clutching the strap of her tote bag like a lifeline. "Could you play, Danny boy?" There, it was out. The request hung in the air between them, so small and yet so enormous. She immediately felt foolish. It was a ridiculous thing to ask. He probably had a set list. He was a holiday entertainer. He played Frosty the Snowman and Silent Night. He probably didn't even know it. He would politely say no, and she would have to slink away, humiliated, the ache in her chest even worse. She braced for the refusal. She prepared her face for the polite, tight smile she would give him before turning to flee. But the refusal didn't come. He didn't smile brightly or say anything cheerful. He just looked at her. Really looked. His eyes moved over her face, taking in the redness around her eyes she couldn't hide, the pallor of her skin. His gaze dropped for just a second to the coat she was swimming in, an old woman's coat on a young woman's frame. He saw the death grip on her bag strap, the slight tremor in her hands dotting that moment. He didn't see a shopper with a random request. He saw a girl carrying a weight so heavy it was bending her. He saw the ghost she was clinging to in the fabric of her coat. The song title, spoken in that broken whisper, wasn't just a song title. It was a key to a locked room full of grief. His expression softened, but not with pity. It was with a deep, immediate understanding. It was the look of someone who recognized real sorrow, who had maybe heard it in his own life, or had seen it enough in others to know its shape. He didn't ask why. He didn't say it was an unusual choice. He simply nodded, a slow, deliberate motion. "Of course," he said. 2 words. Simple, quiet. They held no fanfare, no questioning. Just acceptance. A shock went through her. She hadn't realized how tightly she was coiled, waiting for the rejection, until it didn't come. The relief was so sudden, it made her feel dizzy. She couldn't speak, couldn't even nod back. She just stood there. He turned to the piano. He shuffled the sheet music on the standard holiday fare and moved it to the side. He didn't need it. He placed his hands on the keys, not in his ready-to-play position, but gently, as if feeling their cool smoothness. He closed his eyes for just a second, centering himself, forgetting them all, the scattered crowd, the blinking lights. He was thinking about the song, about the notes, about the feeling in it. He was going to do it. He was really going to play it. For her. She took an involuntary step back, giving him space, but she couldn't make herself walk away. She was rooted to the spot. The world narrowed to the man, the piano, and the space of air where the music would soon be. He lifted his hands, and for a terrifying second, there was only the distant hum of them all. Then he pressed down. The first note filled the atrium. It was low, clear, and hung in the air with a heartbreaking purity. It wasn't a loud note, but it seemed to cut through everything. It was the exact note, the right one. He didn't rush into the melody. He let that first sound resonate, fade, began the next phrase, and then he began to play. The first few notes were tentative, a gentle exploration of the melody. But then his hands found their certainty. The music that flowed from the piano wasn't the simple, halting version her mother used to play. This was fuller, richer, a river of sound where her mother's had been a quiet stream. Yet the soul of it was exactly the same. It was all there in the slow, aching climb of the notes, in the spaces he left between them, heavy with feeling. He didn't just play the song. He understood it. He understood that it wasn't a song about quick happiness, but about love and loss and a farewell that lingered across distance. His head was bowed slightly, his eyes on his hands, but he wasn't just reading invisible sheet music. He was feeling every phrase. For her, the world didn't just narrow, it dissolved. The bright, overlit atrium with its fake snow decorations blurred at the edges, then melted away. The shuffling footsteps of a few shoppers, the beep of a far-off register, the murmur of conversation, it all faded into a low hum, like the sound of the ocean heard from inside a shell. The only thing in sharp, painful focus was the music, and the man conjuring it from the wood and wire. She wasn't standing on cold mall tile anymore. She was in the living room of her childhood home, on a Sunday afternoon in late autumn. The light was that particular golden color that comes just before dusk, slanting through the window and catching dust motes in the air. Her mother was at the old, scarred upright piano, its honey-colored wood warm in the sunbeam. She was wearing a faded blue sweater, her brow slightly furrowed in concentration, as her fingers, not as nimble as this man's, found the chords. The scent wasn't mall popcorn and perfume, but lemon polish from the furniture and the faint, dry smell of the radiator starting to click on. The memory wasn't a flat picture. It was a world she could step into. She could feel the nubby texture of the living room rug under her socks. She could see the familiar crack in the ceiling plaster, shaped like a rabbit. She was 10 years old, lying on her stomach on the floor, a school book open in front of her, not really reading, just listening. Her mother would hum along, her voice a soft, off-key companion to the piano. It was the sound of absolute safety. It was the sound of a world where mothers were permanent. And the worst thing that could happen was a skinned knee. The music swelled under the pianist's hands, moving into the more passionate, pleading section of the song. Asterisk, but come the back. The notes rose, full of a yearning so intense it was a physical pressure in her chest. The memory shifted. She was older now, 16, sullen and stormy, after some forgotten argument. She'd slammed her bedroom door and put on headphones, blasting angry music to drown out the house. But after a while, she'd taken them off. And she heard it. Downstairs, tentative, searching. The familiar melody of Danny Boy. Her mother was playing it, a peace offering without words. The anger had drained out of her then, replaced by a shameful warmth. She hadn't gone downstairs to apologize, not right away. But she'd sat on her bed and listened until the last note faded, and the quiet of the house felt comfortable again. Not charged out, the pianist's right hand played a delicate, cascading run of notes, like tears falling. Then the melody returned, simpler, sadder. She was in a different room now. A hospital room, all stark white and beige, smelling of antiseptic and wilted flowers. Her mother was so small in the bed, dwarfed by tubes and wires. The robust woman who played the piano, who gardened, who filled a house with noise, was gone, replaced by this fragile shell. It was late. The room was dark, except for a small corner light. They had run out of things to say hours ago. The silence was terrible, filled only with the beep of machines. Then, her mother, her eyes closed, had whispered, her voice cracked and dry. "Play it for me." "Play what, Mom?" "The song." "In my head." "Play it in your head for me." So she had. Sitting there, holding her mother's thin, cool hand, she had played Danny Boy in her mind, as clearly as she could, pouring every note, every memory of sunlit afternoons and quiet apologies into that silent offering. Her mother's lips had twitched, the ghost of a smile. A single tear had escaped from the corner of her closed eye and traced a path down her temple into her hair. She had fallen asleep like that. It was the last moment of true connection they had. Back in the mall, a hot tear broke free from her own eye. It rolled down her cheek, fast and heavy, leaving a cool track on her skin. She didn't move to wipe it away. Then another followed, and another. She was crying silently, but completely. The tears weren't the choked-back sobs she'd stifled in the empty hallway. They were a quiet, steady release, like a rain that finally comes after a long drought. Her shoulders shook slightly under the heavy wool coat. Her breath hitched in her throat, but she made no sound. The bags in her hands, forgotten, hung heavy, their straps digging into her palms. She didn't care who saw. The few people still lingering near the piano had noticed. A woman with a stroller glanced over, her expression shifting from curiosity to a soft, knowing sadness. She didn't stare. She just looked for a moment, then gently pushed her stroller away, giving her space. An older couple on a bench paused their conversation. The man put a hand on his wife's knee, and they sat in respectful silence, listening. Watching the young girl in the old coat be undone by a song dot, the pianist saw none of this. His eyes were closed now. He was deep inside the music, his face a mask of quiet intensity. He was playing for her, but he was also playing for the song itself, for every story of love and parting it had ever told. His fingers, which had been so lively with Jingle Bell Rock, now moved with a profound tenderness. He caressed the keys, pulling the melody out with a touch that was both strong and gentle. He held the long, sorrowful notes until they almost faded to nothing, then breathed new life into the next phrase. The song was nearing its end. The final repeated farewell. Asterisk, I'll sleep in peace until you come to me. The music became even quieter, more intimate, as if he were playing for just the two of them in an empty room. The last note, a single, low, resonant tone from the left hand, hung in the air. And then he let it fade into silence. He didn't lift his hands from the keys immediately. He kept them there, as if feeling the last vibration travel through the wood, into his fingers, into the quiet mall air. The space where the music had been felt alive, charged. The ordinary mall sounds seemed hesitant to rush back in. He slowly opened his eyes. He didn't look at the scattered audience. He didn't smile for applause. He looked up, his gaze finding hers. Her face was wet, gleaming under the atrium lights. Her eyes were red, wide open, shattered. She was still trapped in the collision of two worlds, the past, vivid and lost, and the present, cold and real dot in that look they shared. No words were needed. He saw the ocean of grief he had just given voice to. He saw the memory of the woman in the coat, the ghost summoned by his hands. And she saw that he saw. She saw the deep, unspoken understanding in his kind, tired face. He hadn't just played a request. He had performed an act of gentle witnessing. He had held space for her pain in the most public of places and made it sacred. He gave her the slightest nod. It wasn't a bow. It wasn't a "you're welcome." It was an acknowledgement. Asterisk, I see you. I heard you. It was real. Asterisk, the spell was broken, but gently. He slowly moved his hands from the keys and placed them in his lap. He took a slow, quiet breath, coming back to himself, to the job, to the mall. He had given her everything he had in that song. Now he had to let her go. She was still standing there, frozen, the tears continuing to fall. The world was coming back, the lights too bright, the sounds too loud. But the hollow place inside her didn't feel so empty anymore. It was filled now, to the brim, with the beautiful, devastating sound of her mother's song, played perfectly by a stranger. It was a pain she could bear, because it was also love. And for the first time in a long time, that love felt louder than the absence. The silence after the final note wasn't empty. It was full. It was heavy with everything that had just happened, the memories, the tears, the shared understanding that hung in the air between the pianist and the girl in the old coat. For a few heartbeats, the ordinary world held its breath. Then, slowly, the sounds of the mall seeped back in. A child's distant laugh, the whir of a nearby escalator. But they felt softer now, farther away. She was still crying. The tears wouldn't stop. They were quiet tears, a steady leak from a crack in a dam that had finally given way. She was aware of the wetness on her cheeks, the salt taste on her lips. She was aware of the shopping bags, a dead weight in her hands. But she couldn't move. She was anchored to the spot by the last, fading echo of the music in her bones that the pianist watched her. He saw her struggle to surface, to come back to this time and place. He knew this moment, this raw, exposed feeling after the music stops. He had seen it before, in different ways, in different faces. His job was to play, but sometimes, more importantly, his job was to know when not to play, when to let a moment breathe. He didn't jump into another song. He didn't try to lighten the mood with a cheerful chord. He let the silence hold her for as long as she needed it. His hands rested gently on his knees. He offered her the quiet, a safe space for her grief to exist in the open, without being rushed or shushed. Finally, she blinked. A shuddering breath escaped her, the first she'd taken in what felt like minutes. Her eyes, red and swimming, focused on his face. He was still just looking at her, his expression calm and patient. There was no pity there, which she was grateful for. Pity would have felt like a violation. This was something else. It was respect. She knew she should say something. Thank you seemed so small, so useless for what he had just given her. It was like thanking someone for handing you a glass of water after you'd been lost in a desert for days. The words stuck in her throat, a tangled mess of gratitude and sorrow. She tried. Her lips parted, but all that came out was a shaky, wet sigh. She gave a small, helpless shake of her head, unable to speak. He understood. He gave another slow, slight nod. Asterisk, it's okay. You don't have to. Asterisk, that simple gesture unlocked something in her. The tightness in her chest eased, just a fraction. She used the back of her hand, clumsy in her coat sleeve, to wipe at her cheeks. It was a messy, childlike gesture, but it was a start. She was coming back to herself. He saw her movement, the attempt to gather the pieces. It was time to give her a bridge back. To help her move from this intense, private world they'd shared to the public one she had to walk back into. Very slowly, he turned back to the piano. He placed his hands on the keys again, but this time there was no dramatic pause. He began to play, so softly it was almost a whisper. It was Silent Night, but unlike any version she'd ever heard in the mall. He played it slowly, simply stripping away all the fancy flourishes. It was a lullaby. It was gentle. It was a musical hand, extended to help her updot the familiar, peaceful melody was a kindness. It didn't demand anything from her. It didn't try to replace Danny Boy. It just was there, a soft blanket of sound to wrap around her ragged edges. It said, asterisk, the hard part is over. You can breathe now. Asterisk, the spell was officially broken for the rest of the atrium. The old couple on the bench smiled at each other and began to gather their shopping. The woman with the stroller had already moved on. A few new shoppers wandered into the space, drawn by the gentle Christmas carol, unaware of the drama that had just unfolded. Life, mundane mall life, resumed its flow, and she was part of it again. The intense, isolating bubble had popped. She was a crying girl in a mall, listening to a pianist. It was ordinary, and somehow that was okay. She took another deeper, clearer breath. The weight of the bags in her hands registered properly. The parking garage. Her car. Home. These were the next steps. Simple, concrete tasks. She looked at the pianist one more time. He was playing Silent Night, his eyes on his hands, giving her the gift of not being watched, the privacy to leave on her own terms. But she needed him to know. However inadequately. With her free hand, she touched her own chest, just over her heart. It was an instinctive gesture. Then she mouthed two words, shaping them carefully with her still trembling lips. Thank you. He must have seen it in his peripheral vision. He didn't stop playing, didn't look up, but the faintest smile touched the corners of his mouth. A smile of quiet completion. He gave one more small, almost imperceptible nod, keeping the rhythm of the lullaby steady. That was all. It was enough. She turned. The movement felt strange, as if she'd been standing there for hours. Her legs were stiff. She began to walk, not with her earlier hurried, haunted speed, but with a slow, weary steadiness. She walked past the poinsettias, past the benches, toward the wide corridor that led to the parking garage elevators. The piano music grew fainter with each step. Silent night faded into the general hum of the mall. She didn't look back. The walk to the elevator felt long. The tears had mostly stopped, but her face was stiff and salty. She felt utterly drained, as if she'd run a marathon or survived a storm. But there was a new sensation underneath the exhaustion. It was a strange, fragile sense of peace. The crushing weight was still there, the grief for her mother that would never leave, but it had been shifted. It had been shared. For 3 minutes, a stranger had carried it with her. Speaking its language through the piano keys. She reached the elevator bank and pressed the button. The doors opened immediately, empty. She stepped inside and turned to face the closing doors. The last glimpse she had was of the bustling atrium, the twinkling lights, people moving in all directions. The pianist was just a distant figure at a piano, now playing something else she couldn't hear. A normal part of the scenery again. The elevator doors slid shut with a soft whoosh. The sudden, quiet stillness was a relief. She was alone. She let her head fall back against the cool metal wall of the elevator and closed her eyes. In the darkness behind her eyelids. She didn't see the hospital room. She saw the living room, the golden light, her mother's hands on the piano keys, her face soft with concentration. She heard the melody, not as a sad dirge, but as a love song. It was a love that existed beyond time, beyond sickness, beyond a crowded mall. The pianist hadn't played a song of death. He had played a song of enduring love, and in doing so, had given that love back to her, alive and whole. The elevator dinged, announcing the parking level. The doors opened to the concrete chill and smell of car exhaust. She opened her eyes, pushed off the wall, and walked out. The cold air hit her face, sharp and real. She fumbled in her tote bag for her keys, her fingers clumsy. She found her car, unlocked it, and slid into the driver's seat. She dumped the bags onto the passenger side and just sat for a minute in the quiet gloom. She looked at herself in the rearview mirror. A mess. Puffy eyes, red nose, pale skin. But her own eyes looked back at her, clear in a way they hadn't been in months. They weren't hiding. They weren't glassy with unshed tears. They were just sad and tired and real. She pulled her mother's coat tighter around her, burying her nose in the collar for a second. The scent was still there, fainter now, mixed with the cold of outside. It didn't stab at her heart this time. It just was. A comfort. She started the car. The engine rumbled to life, and the dashboard lights glowed. She had to go home. Her father would be there, probably worrying. Her brother might call later. There was a black dress she still needed to buy, eventually. Life, with all its mundane and difficult details, was waiting. But as she drove out of the dark garage and into the gray winter afternoon, the melody of Danny Boy played softly in her mind. This time, it didn't bring the paralyzing wave of grief. It brought the image of the pianist's kind, understanding face. It brought the feeling of those few minutes when she hadn't been alone in her sadness. She wasn't fixed. She wasn't over it. But a stranger had given her a gift. He had shown her that her grief could be spoken, could be sung, could be beautiful, and that it could connect her to another human being instead of only isolating her. He had taken a memory that was beginning to fossilize in pain and made it breathe again. She drove, the wipers sweeping away a light drizzle, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like a ghost. She felt like a person, heartbroken, but alive. And that was a start. The drive home was quiet. The usual radio chatter felt like too much noise, so she drove in silence, the rhythmic swish of the wipers the only sound. The world outside her car windows was a blur of wet streets and early Christmas lights. But inside, for the first time in months, there was a kind of stillness. Not the empty stillness of shock, but the quiet after a storm has passed. She replayed it in her head, not the sad parts, but the feeling of it. The way the pianist had looked at her, really seen her, before he even played a note. The deep, resonant sound of that first key being pressed. The way the music had wrapped around her, not to smother, but to hold her together as she fell apart. She thought of the people who had noticed her tears, the woman with the stroller who had quietly moved away to give her space. They hadn't stared or whispered. They had just allowed it. Her private grief had happened in public, and the world hadn't ended. It had, in a small way, made room for her. She pulled into the driveway of the house she'd grown up in. It looked the same, but it always felt different now. A little darker, a little quieter. She turned off the engine and sat for a moment, gathering herself. She could see her father's shape moving behind the kitchen window. He was probably making tea, his solution for everything. When she walked in, the warmth of the house enveloped her. The familiar smells lemon cleaner, the faint scent of the wood stove, were a comfort. "That you?" Her father called from the kitchen. "Yeah," she said, her voice a little rough. She hung her mother's coat on the hook by the door, running her hand over the worn wool one last time before she let it go. She walked into the kitchen. Her father was at the counter, spooning tea leaves into a pot. He turned, and his eyes, the same shade as her own but tired and older, scanned her face. He saw the puffiness, the redness. His own face tightened with a familiar worry. "Rough day?" he asked, his voice gentle dot. She nodded, leaning against the doorframe. "I went to the mall. For that dress." "Ah," he said. He knew what the mall, what any crowd, could do to her these days. "Find anything?" "No," she said. Then she paused. But something else happened. He waited, the teapot in his hand. There was a pianist in the atrium, playing Christmas songs. The words came out slowly, finding their path. I asked him to play a song for me." "Not a Christmas song." Her father's eyebrows lifted slightly. This was not like her. The girl who barely spoke to cashiers had asked a stranger for a personal favor. "What song?" He asked, though something in her face, in the way she was telling the story, must have given him a clue. "Danny boy," she whispered. The air in the kitchen changed. His face softened, then crumpled just a little around the edges. He looked down at the teapot, blinking fast. "Oh," was all he said, the word thick. "He played it, Dad," she said, her own throat tightening again, but with a different kind of emotion now. "He really played it, like he knew." She didn't have the words to describe how he had played it. She didn't need to. Her father understood the weight of that song in their family. He set the teapot down slowly. He looked at me, and he said, "Of course," and then he played it like it was the only thing that mattered. The story poured out of her now, and I just stood there and cried, in the middle of them all. And it was okay. Tears were in her father's eyes now, too. He came around the counter, and without a word, pulled her into a hug. It was a tight, wordless embrace. They didn't hug often anymore. It sometimes felt like they were both too fragile, afraid of breaking. But this hug was solid. He was crying for his wife, and she was crying for her mother. but they were also crying for each other, for the lonely months they'd each endured in the same house. Lost in separate oceans of grief. "I'm glad," he murmured into her hair, his voice cracking. "I'm glad he played it for you." They stood like that for a long minute, until the kettle on the stove began a low, urgent whistle. He pulled back, wiping his eyes with the heel of his hand, and went to turn it off. "Tell me about him," he said, his back to her as he poured the steaming water into the pot. So she did. She described the pianist's kind face, his quiet concentration, the way he'd transitioned so gently into silent night afterwards, like he was tucking her in. She told him about the people who saw, and how it hadn't felt like an exposure, but like a shared, respectful moment. "It felt like he gave her back to me," she said finally, the truest words she had for it. "Just for a few minutes. Not sick. Just her." Her father brought 2 mugs of tea to the kitchen table, and they sat. The afternoon light was fading, turning the room a soft blue. For the first time in what felt like forever, they talked about her mother, without it being a clinical discussion of illness or a painful memory that ended in tears. They talked about the piano, about how she'd learned that one song from her own father, about the way she'd hum off-key. They laughed a little, a wet, choked kind of laugh, but a real one. It was a crack in the ice that had formed around their home. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. A week later, she went back to the mall. The black dress wasn't important anymore. She had something else to do. She went straight to the atrium. Her heart was pounding again, but not with dread, with a nervous purpose. The piano was there. A different man was playing, a younger man with a jazzy style, working through an upbeat version of Winter Wonderland. Her heart sank for a moment. She hadn't even considered that the pianist from last week might not be there. He probably had different shifts, different gigs. She felt foolish, standing there with her small plan. She waited for the song to end, then approached. The younger pianist smiled brightly. "Hi there. Request? I was wondering," she said, feeling shy. "The man who usually plays here in the afternoons. Older, with gray hair. Is he here today?" "Oh, Leo?" The young man said. "Yeah, he's the main guy. This is actually his shift, but he swapped with me today. Family thing. He'll be back tomorrow, same time." Leo. He had a name. It suited him. Simple, solid. "Okay," she said, relieved. "Thank you." She left the mall, but she returned the next afternoon. And there he was, Leo, sitting at the piano, playing the Christmas song, his hands moving with that same gentle certainty. Her breath caught. It felt like seeing an old friend. She waited on the periphery until he finished the song and took a sip from his thermos. Then she walked forward. He looked up as she approached. For a second, there was no recognition, just the polite, expectant look of a performer ready for a request. Then his eyes changed. They focused, warmed. He saw the girl from last week. He saw her clear eyes, the absence of the crushing weight on her shoulders. A slow smile touched his lips. "Hello," he said. "Hi," she said. She held out a small, plain gift bag. I wanted to bring you this. To say thank you. For last week." He looked surprised, then touched. He set his thermos down and took the bag. Inside was a simple, good-quality notebook and a nice pen. Attached to it was a card. On the front, it was blank. Inside, she had written only 2 sentences. Asterisk. "Thank you for playing my mother's song. Asterisk, asterisk, you helped me remember the love, not just the loss." Asterisk, he read it. His eyes glistened suddenly, and he blinked, looking down at the card for a long moment. When he looked back up, his smile was softer, deeper. "This is too kind," he said, his voice husky. "But it was my honor. truly. I know you hear a lot of requests, she said, but that one, it meant everything. He nodded, understanding completely. It's why I play, he said simply. Not for the Christmas songs, for the chance to play the one song someone needs to hear. He looked at the notebook, running his thumb over the cover. I'll use this for my music. Thank you. They talked for just a few more minutes. He asked, very gently, if her mother had played. She said yes, just that one song. He smiled and said, then she was a pianist too. One song is enough if it's played with heart. It was the perfect thing to say. She didn't want to overstay, to break the magic of what had happened. So she said goodbye, and he thanked her again for the gift. As she walked away, he didn't immediately start another song. She glanced back once from near the poinsettias. He was just sitting there, looking at the notebook in his hands, a quiet, thoughtful expression on his face. Then he opened it to the first page, uncapped the pen she'd given him, and began to write something down. She turned and walked out of the mall into the cold, bright afternoon. She didn't feel like a ghost. She didn't feel like a girl hiding in her mother's coat. She felt like herself, someone who had loved, who had lost, and who was slowly finding a way to carry both. She knew the grief would still come in waves. The wedding would be hard. The holidays would have a hollow space. But now she had a new memory to hold on to, not just of her mother at the piano, but of a stranger who had become a temporary bridge between a past full of love and a present full of ache. He had played a song, and in doing so, had reminded her that love never really ends. It just changes its tune. She got into her car and drove home, humming a familiar, aching melody under her breath. This time, it didn't bring tears. It brought a feeling of quiet connection, stretching from her mother's living room to a mall atrium to the road ahead. It was enough.